In one of the small villages whose population does not exceed 200 people, Sam lives this young man who returns from work at night using his motorcycle. One day, Sam was a little late in returning home until midnight, and there were only stray animals, including dogs and cats, messing around in the garbage in the streets. There was no source of lighting on the street that reached his house, and his path was completely silent. In this atmosphere, Sam passed by the cemeteries of his town, and here he began to hear the sounds of loud songs and loud laughter, as if there was joy inside the cemeteries. With a little concentration, Sam was able to locate the voice. The voice seemed familiar to him, as if they were people he knew before. And in a few seconds he realized that this voice was of an elderly lady living in the village, and Sam knew her well because she lived next to his house. Bad delusions began to take hold of Sam's mind. His body was trembling with fear, and soon horror penetrated into himself. Sam approached the cemetery door cautiously and took a look inside to try to figure out what was happening inside, but he could not get to anything. He tried to tell himself that what he had heard were only fantasies that had no basis in reality, and it was the darkness and tranquility of the night that sent horror into his heart. He closed the cemetery door, and Sam got on his bike to continue his way home. And it's only minutes until he hears those voices coming back again, with the same sound and intensity. Despite the intense fear that coursed through Sam's body, his curiosity led him to return to the cemetery again. Sam returned to the cemetery, determined to find out the cause and source of those sounds. As soon as the door opened again, the sounds of songs began to rise, and a loud scream terrified him. He quickly closed the door and returned to his bike, heading home. The next day, at approximately the same time, the same scene was repeated, but this time, Sam entered the cemetery with a lamp in his hand so that he could see inside. Sam opened the door to the cemetery and took 2 steps inside when a strong wind closed the door behind him, causing his heart to shake in horror. Sam tried to open the door, but to no avail after several desperate attempts. Sam had to turn around to see what was happening in the cemetery, and here was the surprise. It is the same old lady, but her eyes are burning with fire, and her mouth is open like a deep, endless well. Her arms are long on the ground, and her long white hair is in a tail behind her. What a sight! The woman moved to put her hand on Sam's shoulder, and he was shocked. It pierced Sam's shoulder like air. Sam stopped for a moment, astonished by what he saw, and suddenly he rushed back with force, collapsed against the door, and kicked it with his hands and feet until he was able to break it and escape. He did not stop for a moment, and did not dare to look behind him for a moment to see if the old woman was standing or had disappeared. All he could hear were the intermittent sounds of laughter that continued to follow him for a long distance. Sam continued running, leaving his motorcycle in front of the cemetery door. He entered his house, closed all the doors and windows, and hid in his bed until he calmed down and fell asleep. In the morning, Sam goes with a friend to get his bike, only to be surprised that his bike is in the same place, and the cemetery door that he broke last night has been repaired and closed with a large lock. Could it be that old woman who fixed the door and locked it on herself? Or was it the cemetery keeper who did this? But how could he fix it in such a short time? Since that day, Sam never dared to go down that path again.